Have you ever had anybody pay it forward or maybe buy you something, maybe at a restaurant or something like that, and not expect anything in return or not have you pay them back? I can remember when I was at college at Asbury, and one of the things that a lot of the guys on the hall in the dorm that I lived in would do is we would go on these late night Taco Bell and McDonald's runs. And what we would do is we would pile into these cars, and we would go through these drive-throughs and have like 4 or 5 orders, and the people in the window would get frustrated with us. And we would get the food, and then sometimes we would go and sit in the parking lot and eat together. We would take it back to the dorm, and we would go in somebody's room and eat together. And they were always a blast to go and do. And I remember oftentimes there would be some times where I would go not with money because sometimes I didn't have money, but I went solely for the fellowship and the fun that was had during those late night trips. And I remember more than once there would be guys that would, they would notice that I wouldn't order something and they would offer to buy me something. They would offer to buy me some food. And of course, I had the response of, well, let me pay you back. In the next couple of days, or let me buy your food the next time we come. And oftentimes they would say, hey, no, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. And they would buy me food expecting nothing in return. And I still remember that to this day and how that made me feel, some of these guys took money that they had earned and spent a little bit on me expecting nothing in return. And I know maybe for you, you've been in that place where somebody doesn't expect you to pay them back, that they do something nice just simply because they want you to be included or want you to know that you are loved. And in these moments, having somebody asking or saying that you don't have to pay them back because they bought you a taco or something else is a heartwarming idea. But other times, paying somebody back, is a little complicated. See, outside of paying money back to somebody because you owe them something, the idea of payback also comes up when someone hurts us. For example, when someone talks about us behind our back, we want payback. When one of our when somebody flirts with our girlfriend or our boyfriend, we want payback. When someone fails to text us back or invite us to a party or a group hangout, we want payback. And in those moments where we've been hurt, we want payback. Okay, now I know you may not go on this super evil mindset and you may not, you know, try to get this terrifying revenge, or you may not write a song about that person in order to get your payback, but we all try to get payback in one way or another because we want them to feel the hurt that we felt. We want them to be embarrassed the way that we were embarrassed. See, for most of us, our first reaction is always to get them back or to get even, or at least get something in return, or give them something in return, even if that's just by simply making a Snapchat comment or putting a post on Instagram that shows that throws a little bit of shade in the direction of that person. But isn't it true that we are that the closer we are to a person, the more we want payback? See, most of you aren't trying to pay back someone else's brother or sister for something they've done to you. Your feelings probably aren't hurt because of someone else's best friend. And you probably aren't angry because of what someone else's ex did to you. See, the people who are closest to us are the people who know us best and have the most potential to hurt us. Therefore, they're the most likely to be on our list of people who we owe payback to. And the reality is for most of us, payback comes in a few different forms. It comes in a public form where we get public payback. And this is when we do to them what they did to us in a very obvious way. We talk bad about that person to somebody else. We clap back at them louder than they clapped at us, right? We make it obvious to everybody around us that we are getting our payback. And then there's passive payback. And this is a more subtle way. This is when we make comments that aren't obviously hurtful, but could be interpreted that way. This is when we put a subtle post on social media. This is when we roll our eyes when that person who hurts us talks. This is when we ignore someone's text. We get our payback in ways that not everybody kind of notices. And then there's the imaginary payback. See, imaginary payback happens when this payback consumes our thoughts but never leads us to action. This happens when we have an argument in our own mind and we destroy them with it because we have a better argument. We have a better comeback and we just simply annihilate their side of the argument. That's imaginary payback. And then there's perhaps the most satisfying payback of all, which is this: enjoying watching them fail. Like when your ex broke up with you to date somebody else, but then that person they left you to date ends up dumping them. That's good fail payback, if you want to say. Or maybe your mom snapped at you and hurt your feelings, but she's the one now that is upset and she's crying and she's the one apologizing to you. Or maybe that guy that made fun of you going throughout middle school, maybe he face plants in the hallway or face plants at a pep rally. See, in those moments, it feels like justice, doesn't it? It feels good to see someone get what's coming to them. Well, that's good or bad. That's exactly the sort of situation that Joseph found himself in as we wrap up with his story tonight. So I want to invite you to turn to Genesis chapter 45, which is where we'll be tonight. And in this series, we've been journeying through the life of Joseph. And we have come across some pretty wild things, right? Early in this series, we talked about how Joseph knew he was his dad's favorite, and he rubbed it in his brother's face, and that Joseph also had these dreams that basically said that his whole family would bow down to him one day, and he, not very smartly, went and told his brothers. Well, that led his brothers to plot to kill him. But eventually, instead of killing him, they saw this group of traveling, I don't even know what they were, just this traveling group, okay? And they decided to sell him into slavery. And the rest of this series that we've been on has covered the fact that Joseph was a slave in Egypt. And then Joseph was a slave in prison in Egypt. And then Joseph became the second in charge, second in command of all of Egypt because he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. And that's, you think about it, okay, that's not a bad place. That's not a bad turnout for somebody that was sold into slavery to become the second in command of all of Egypt. That story sounds pretty great, right? But tonight we're going to kind of read and talk about a little bit of a plot twist in the story as Joseph's story kind of wraps up. See, after Joseph was second in command, there was a food shortage where his family lived. It was actually not just where his family lived, it was all of Egypt went through this massive food shortage and crisis. So Joseph's dad sent sent the brothers to Egypt to ask for food because their country was out of food and they were starving. Okay, now remember, these are the same brothers that sold Joseph into slavery, and Jacob says, hey, go to Egypt and ask for food. See, at this point in the story, Joseph's family thought he was dead. They thought he was long gone. So, of course, they weren't even thinking about the possibility of coming in contact with Joseph and seeing Joseph when they get to Egypt and ask for food. But when they arrived in Egypt and saw Joseph, not knowing it was Joseph, okay, this huge drama unfolds in this story, and you can read this entire interaction between Joseph and his brothers in Genesis chapter 42 through 50. And I highly encourage you to do that because it's worth the read, because now you know the backstory leading up to this. And when you read this in Genesis 42 through 50, it's kind of like a movie, and it's a pretty interesting thing to read. But tonight I want to kind of focus our attention on Genesis 45 so that we can kind of learn something from Joseph. So I invite you to look at Genesis 45, verses 1 through 2 with me this evening. Listen to what this says. Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants, so he called out, "Send everyone away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Now I want you to imagine the tension and the emotion in this moment for Joseph. Joseph was face to face with the people, with his brothers who tried to kill him first off, and then ultimately sold him into slavery. The same brothers that ironically now come to him and are asking for help. The reality is this was a get what's coming to you moment at its finest. Everything had been set up perfectly for Joseph. Payback was dropped into Joseph's lap. Because Joseph could have refused them food. He could have them thrown into prison and maybe give them a taste of their own medicine. He could have even had them killed. And they were certainly willing to do it to him, and he could have had his payback moment. I want to pause. What would you do? I mean, don't obviously say it out loud, because maybe your sibling's sitting next to you. But if you were in Joseph's shoes, what would you have done? If you had all the power in the world to hurt the person or the people who had hurt you the most, and you had this opportunity laid in front of you, what would you have done? Well, as the story continues, Joseph ask his brothers to walk over and stand close to him. And you can imagine the terror the brothers felt. I mean, it said right there in verse 3, they were so terrified they couldn't even speak. So the story continues in verses 4 through 7 by saying this. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by great deliverance." Now, there's only one reason Joseph could have responded the way he did. He didn't try to get payback, because he had already let go of the idea of revenge. Trust me, he had a while to do so. He had already done the homework of forgiveness. And you say, Wes, how do you know that? How do you know he did the homework of forgiveness? Well, because Joseph looked into the eyes of the ones who had caused him the most grief. And he looked into the eyes of the ones who had caused him the most grief and chose to care about how they were feeling. See, when Joseph says, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, he was acknowledging their wrong and his hurt without causing more hurt. See, and the reality is only a healed person could do this. Only someone who had forgiven could do this. Joseph, in this moment, chose forgiveness over payback. And we see that in the moment when he had the greatest opportunity for revenge. Somewhere between being sold into slavery and being reunited with his brothers, Joseph did the hard work of giving his hope to God and allowing God to be central in his healing. That's why Joseph was quick to acknowledge God in the area where his brothers has caused him the most pain. It didn't make what his brothers did okay. It didn't take away the feelings of hurt and betrayal that I'm sure he felt. But it just took the real pain and the real hurt and no longer put them center stage. It put God there instead. And the reality is that made forgiveness possible. See, the reason Joseph was able to forgive his brothers was because he realized that even in the midst of the wrong that his brothers had done, God was using it for his good. That's why he tells them what he does. Don't be mad for selling me here. God has worked everything out. God has put me in this place so I could save you. It's basically what he's saying. Understand something. Forgiveness was not only for his brothers, but it was freedom from his own pain too. Joseph, if you continue reading that, goes on to tell his brothers to go get their father and to move their entire family to Egypt because the famine would continue, and without making this move, his family would suffer. And so that's what the brothers are getting ready to do. But then there's this interesting interaction in here between them in verses 14 and 15 that I want you to notice. And this is before they leave. Look at what verses 14 and 15 say. Then Joseph, this is after he told his brothers to go get their family and bring them to Egypt. It says 14, then Joseph threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin wept on his shoulder. Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept, and afterward his brothers talked with him. That may be one of the only things better than payback, and it's reconciliation. This is where reconciliation is where you make up with somebody, where you mend the brokenness with somebody. And this is where we see God do the impossible in our relationship, where we see God bring peace when there was only hurt. And it all happens because of forgiveness. And here's the reality for you and I. When it comes to other people hurting us, we too have the opportunity to choose something better than payback. In fact, here's a simple way to remember it. When we don't know what to do, pursue peace instead of payback. When we don't know what to do, pursue peace instead of payback. I know this sounds countercultural, and I know it doesn't make much sense, But the reality is if we want to make an impact for Jesus, we must be people that pursue peace and not payback. You say, but Wes, what does that look like? What does pursuing peace look like? Well, I want to give you two quick ways. One, when you pursue peace, you fight for the relationship. In other words, you can fight to win. You can fight to be right. You can fight to prove your point. Or you can fight the urge for payback and pursue peace. But let me just tell you, you can't do both. Joseph preserved his relationship with all of his brothers because he chose peace. He brought restoration and reconciliation to the relationship, the very much so broken relationship between he and his family, because he chose peace instead of payback. And the reality is he was only able to do that because he fought for forgiveness. And the only way he was able to forgive his family and all the things that they had done, brothers specifically, was through the help of God. See, Joseph didn't have a superpower that allowed him to do this. He just had the determination to do the work peace required and an understanding of God at work in his situation, which means you and I can do this same thing. Second thing is this: when you pursue peace, you lay down your right to get payback. You let go of revenge. You say goodbye to your desires to get even, and instead you choose the path of forgiveness. You choose God's story of reconciliation instead of your own story of payback and revenge. This is easier said than done, I know, and something you may have to work daily at. But the ultimate benefit is for you. You not only have peace with them, but you have peace in yourself. And the reality is I get it, this is complicated. I get it that this goes against what you do and who you are, maybe. And I know it's because what happened to you isn't what happened to Joseph. In fact, I could tell dozens of stories, and none of them would be exactly like yours. See, maybe you spent the whole time while I've talked about not getting payback and seeking peace, asking yourself questions like this: do you always have to reconcile? What about when it's toxic? What if you're the one who did the hurting? How do you even reconcile that when you cause the pain? See, each of us have unique and complicated situations, and figuring out what it looks like to pursue peace, I'll tell you, isn't easy, but it's vital, because pursuing peace is what brings healing to those whole parts and those broken pieces of your life. So as I close, here's what I want you to think about tonight. Begin to think about what you have the power to do when it comes to pursuing peace. What do you need to decide? Who do you need to forgive? What offense do you need to bring to God? My simple challenge to you tonight is this: be a person that is quick to pursue peace and forgive, and slow to pursue payback. Understand something: giving payback to somebody only causes more hurt. But pursuing peace and practicing forgiveness is what brings healing to your life and the other person's life also. Look, sometimes one of the best ways to be like Jesus and love like Jesus is to forgive like Jesus. Let me just remind you, that we are all sinners in need of God's grace. And until God sent Jesus to die on the cross, we were all headed to hell. Because that's what we deserve because of our sin. But because Jesus came and lived the perfect life that none of us could ever live, and died on a cross, and then 3 days later rose from the grave, our final destination doesn't have to be hell if we believe in what Jesus did. See, the reality for you and I is that we have to forgive much because we have been forgiven much. And if we are going to be like Jesus, if we are going to love like Jesus, then we must be people that forgive like Jesus. Maybe you're here, maybe you're listening to this tonight and you're not a follower of Jesus and you don't know anything about that. I would love to talk to you. I'd love for you to call the church office. I'd love for you to text me. Many of the students that attend Central have my cell phone number. I would love to tell you more about that. But as you go out from here, as you turn off this video, my challenge for you this week is to go and be somebody that pursues peace instead of payback. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for your love and your mercy. God, thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for the fact that you are a God that did not pursue payback because of our sin against you, but that, God, you pursued peace. You pursued forgiveness through your Son, Jesus Christ, and sending him to die on a cross for all sins. God, may you make us people that forgive much because we have been forgiven much. God, I pray that you make us people that pursue peace over payback, and that we would fight for forgiveness, and that we would fight off these temptations, God, to pursue revenge and to pursue more hurt, and that, God, we would be people that pursue forgiveness and love just as you have done with us. God, be with these students, be with whoever is watching this, God. May you speak to their lives, and may, as we close out this series, may we reflect on all the different lessons that we've covered over the life of Joseph in these last few weeks. We love you. We thank you for all that you've done and all that you're going to do. We pray this in the sweet name of Jesus. Amen.